2, otherwise most commonly referred to as California's Rainy Day Fund. Well, when it was adopted by the voters as Proposition 2, it was titled State Budget Stabilization Act, Legislative Constitutional Amendment by the Attorney General in the title and summary. Now, the official ballot summary that was prepared for this measure by the Legislative Analyst Office summarized the measure in the following 5 ways. One, it requires an annual transfer of 1.5% of general fund revenues to the state budget stabilization account. It second requires additional transfer of personal capital gains tax revenues exceeding 8% of general fund revenues to the budget stabilization account and under certain conditions to a dedicated K through 14 school reserve fund. Third, it requires that half the budget stabilization account revenues be used to repay state debts and any unfunded liabilities. Fourth, it allows the limited use of funds in case of emergency or if there is a state budget deficit. And fifth, it caps the budget stabilization account at 10% of general fund revenues, and it directs the remainder to be spent on infrastructure. According to the LAO, in terms of the fiscal impact for this ballot measure, they said that some existing state debts would be paid down faster, resulting in long-term savings for the state. They also said that there would be changes in the level of state budget reserves, which would depend on the economy and future decisions by the governor and the legislature. And it also notes that reserves kept by some school districts could be smaller. There were a number of changes to the California Constitution as a result of Prop 2. The first was in Article 4, which deals with the legislative branch of government, and it added Section 12.5, again by Prop 2 in the November 2014 statewide election. And Section 12.5 says that within 10 days following the submission of the budget, which is 10 days after January 10th, and following the proposed adjustments to the governor's budget, as well as following the enactment of the budget bill itself, the Director of Finance is required to submit to the legislature first, estimates of general fund revenues for the ensuing fiscal year and for the 3 fiscal years thereafter. And second, estimates of general fund expenditures for the ensuing fiscal year and for 3 fiscal years thereafter. The bulk of Prop 2, the Rainy Day Fund again, is in Article 16 of the California Constitution, beginning with Section 20, where Subdivision A actually creates in the general fund the budget stabilization account. And it began in the 2015-16 fiscal year and requires every fiscal year thereafter, based upon the Budget Act for that fiscal year, for the controller to transfer general fund to this budget stabilization account by October 1, a sum equal to 1.5% estimated amount of general fund revenues for that particular year. Beginning also from the 2016 fiscal year and every fiscal year thereafter, the Department of Finance is required to provide for the legislature a number of things, including an estimate of the amount of general fund proceeds of taxes that may be appropriated for that fiscal year, an estimate of that portion of the general fund proceeds of taxes that are derived from personal income taxes paid on net capital gains. That portion of the state's funding obligation that results from including different provisions as general fund proceeds of taxes. And then beginning in the 16-17 fiscal year and every fiscal year thereafter, the Department of Finance is required to calculate a number of things using the same methodology used for the relevant fiscal year, including an updated estimate of the amount of general fund proceeds of taxes that may be appropriated under the GAN limit, an updated estimate of the portion of general fund proceeds that are derived from personal income taxes paid on net capital gains, among other provisions. And by every October 1, based on estimates in the Annual Budget Act, the controller is required to transfer amounts from the general fund and the budget stabilization account to along the following lines. 50% of both the amounts identified are transferred from the general fund to the budget stabilization account, and then the remaining 50% is appropriated by the legislature for one or more obligations, either unfunded general fund obligations, budgetary loans to the general fund, payable claims for mandated costs, unfunded liabilities for state level pension plans, and the pre-funding of OPBs or other post-employment benefits in excess of current base amounts. Also, by October 1 of each fiscal year, again, based upon estimates in the Budget Act, the controller is required to transfer amounts from the general fund to the budget stabilization account pursuant to a schedule that is provided by the Director of Finance. Also, by October 1 of every fiscal year, the controller is required to transfer amounts between the general fund and the budget stabilization account based upon a schedule that is put together by the Department of Finance. In section 21, again, this is added to the public finance provisions of the California Constitution. It creates in section 21 of the Public School System Stabilization Account. And every October 1, the controller has to transfer, based upon a schedule by the DOF, certain amounts from the general fund to the Public School System Stabilization Account. And those are all based upon calculations as well as schedules prepared by the Director of Finance. And then every fiscal year, the controller is going to transfer amounts from the general fund to the Public School System Stabilization Account, subject to any reductions or suspensions of the transfer amounts. The Director of Finance, the DOF, is required to calculate amounts that are going to be transferred from the general fund to the school stabilization account. There are very detailed rules throughout. And then we get to section 22, which again is also new. This says that upon the governor's proclamation declaring a budget emergency and identifying conditions constituting the emergency, that the legislature may pass a bill that suspends or reduces a specified dollar amount for one fiscal year for the transfer of monies from the general fund to the budget stabilization account. Or they can return funds that have been transferred to the budget stabilization account to the general fund for appropriations to address the budget emergency. They can also suspend or reduce by a specified dollar amount for a single fiscal year the transfer of funds from the general fund to the public school system stabilization account. And then budget emergency is defined based upon section 3 of Article 13B, which is in the GAN limit or the state appropriation limit, and a determination by the governor that estimated resources are inadequate to fund general fund expenditures by the current or ensuing fiscal year is also taken into consideration as well. So that's a broad overview of Prop 2, the Rainy Day Fund for the state of California.